In the previous episode, we witnessed the rise of Masada, a mountain fortress turned into a final refuge, where the last defenders of Judea made their stand against Rome's unstoppable legions. They chose death over slavery, but that was only the beginning. Today, we return to the mountain, where flames still flicker in stone, and the echo of that choice still haunts history. This is part 2 of The Last Flame, the Fall of Masada. Only here, on Echoes of Time, the Roman banners still fluttered over the cliffs of Masada, but the fires had gone cold. Beneath the desert sun, silence stretched across the ruins. No cheers, no songs of triumph, only the rustling of wind through scorched stone. For all its might, Rome had conquered only ghosts. Flavius Silva, commander of the 10th Legion, stood at the edge of the plateau. The once proud general gazed down at the bodies men, women, and children lying in eerie stillness. A fire had raged here, not of flame, but of defiance. He gave the order for burial, but no celebration. Not this time. To Rome, Masada was the end of the Jewish resistance. A footnote, a fortress taken, a line in a scroll, but to others, it was the beginning of something else. Whispers of what happened spread from soldier to scribe. Some were horrified, some inspired. A senator in Rome wrote in private letters that no empire could truly win against people who chose their own end. In the provinces, small Jewish communities lit candles in secret, not to mourn, but to remember. Masada was a name now spoken softly, but never forgotten. In Alexandria, a rabbi told his students, they died free, and that makes them eternal. In Judea, ruins were sealed. The Roman government issued orders, no pilgrimages, no gatherings, no recognition of the rebels. But already it was too late. Stories slipped through the cracks of empire. A merchant who had known Eleazar ben Yair passed a folded letter to a friend in Antioch. It contained only a single line, tell them what we chose. Across the sea, in dusty corners of foreign cities, survivors whispered to their children. One had fled before the final night. An old woman with a broken ankle, hidden by her daughter. She told the tale to a scribe decades later. They didn't take their lives in despair, she said. They took them because Rome had already taken everything else. That scribe would write the first version of a story that outlived the ruins. A story that didn't end in death, but in choice. That parchment would vanish for centuries, lost in fire, buried in war, but the words had already traveled. Through breath, through memory. By the time the 2nd century dawned, few Romans remembered the siege, but one message echoed louder than any other. Masada had fallen. To the Romans, it was a final victory, but to others, it was the birth of a legend. To history, Masada was a tomb, but history does not always see the ones who walk away. When the Roman soldiers searched the fortress, they found a woman and 5 children hidden in the deep cisterns, silent as shadows. They did not scream. They did not beg. They waited for the noise to end. One of the women, Yoel, had lived through 3 sieges. She had lost a husband at Gamla, a brother in Jerusalem, and now an entire world at Masada. When the Romans dragged her into daylight, her eyes did not flinch. She spoke no words, but the story inside her was already burning. They were brought before Flavius Silva, who studied them with unreadable eyes. A centurion asked, shall we execute them too? Silva raised his hand. No, let them live. Let them tell what they saw. And so they did. The youngest child, a boy named Boaz, would later recall only fragments. A long tunnel, the soft hand of his sister covering his mouth, the sound of chanting above, then silence, then boots. For years, he spoke of it only in dreams. Yoel was sent to a camp outside Caesarea. For weeks, she did not speak. Then, one night, she asked for ink and parchment. A Roman guard brought it, curious. What could a defeated woman wish to write? But Yoel did not write in hatred. She wrote in remembrance. She described the final speech of Eleazar ben Yair, the torches, the silence, the vote, the tears of mothers, the songs sung in trembling voices. She described how each person walked into the flame not with fear, but with pride. Her words were not written to wound Rome. They were written so her children would remember. That letter was never delivered. The scroll was buried beneath stones when Yoel died, but one of her granddaughters would one day find it, wrapped in cloth, hidden in a clay jar. That girl Miriam would carry the letter across the sea to Cyprus, then to Alexandria. There, in a crowded marketplace, she recited the words aloud for the first time. A small group listened, then others. By the time she finished, dozens stood in silence. One man whispered, she brought Masada back to life. From that day, Miriam was known not by her own name, but as the daughter of the mountain. She traveled from city to city, repeating the story, not of death, but of decision, not of a fall, but of a stand. Years passed, empires shifted, Names faded, but somewhere in every Jewish home, the children heard it. There was once a mountain where people chose freedom, and it burned, but it did not die, because the ones who survived carried the flame forward.
Miriam, known only as the daughter of the mountain, became more than a storyteller. In every city she visited, Tyre, Antioch, Alexandria, people gathered not for entertainment, but for remembrance. She did not ask for coin. She did not ask for shelter. She only asked for silence when she spoke the names of the fallen. She told the story exactly as her grandmother had written it. Eleazar's voice. The torches. The choice. No embellishments. No theatrics. Just memory, passed like a sacred object from mouth to heart. Those who heard it carried it forward. And thus, Masada did not end in stone. It spread like smoke. In Babylon, a teacher repeated Miriam's words to his students by firelight. In Carthage, a merchant whispered the tale to his son before sleep. In Athens, a philosopher wrote that courage could be taught not in words, but in examples, and pointed to a mountain far from Greece as proof. The Romans tried to erase it. They banned the name from scrolls. They punished those who gathered near the Dead Sea. But stories are rivers. They flow underground. They carve through silence. The more Rome pressed down, the deeper the roots of Masada grew. Over time, facts became symbols. Eleazar's speech became poetry. The flame became a metaphor. Some said the fortress had vanished in fire so intense it left no ash. Others claimed the bodies had turned to light. But one detail never changed: they chose their fate. Generations passed. Languages changed. But among scattered people, the name Masada remained a whisper of dignity. In distant lands, under foreign kings, the tale gave strength to those who had no armies, no lands, no walls. It reminded them they still had a choice: to kneel or not. A child in Persia carried the story in his prayers. A woman in Hispania etched its symbol into the inside of her bracelet. A scribe in Egypt copied the tale into a scroll, though he feared it might be burned. Yet he wrote anyway. For if we forget, he added, we become less than what they died for. The legend deepened. It was no longer about siege or death. It was about meaning. About the sacred line no oppressor could cross. Masada had become a mountain that existed in every heart that refused to yield. When Miriam grew old, she returned to the desert. She stood once more at the base of that forgotten fortress. She did not climb it. She only looked upward. And she whispered a single word, still burning. Then she turned and walked away. She left behind more than a name, she left behind a spark.
Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. Scrolls turned to dust, names to silence. But Masada remained a flame without smoke, burning in stories told beneath stars and in shadows. In darkened rooms where hope was scarce, someone always remembered. In the highlands of Judea, rebels fighting Roman patrols still whispered the names of Eleazar and Miriam. In Babylonian exile, rabbis used the tale not to speak of death, but of defiance. You may lose the land, one said, but never the right to stand. In medieval Spain, where Jews faced conversion or exile, a group of families fled to the mountains. One mother told her children, "We are not the first." Masada lives again. When the Inquisition came, they chose silence over betrayal. Some survived, others disappeared, but the story endured. In Eastern Europe, during long winters of fear and persecution, the tale of the mountain became a lullaby. Fathers told sons that their ancestors once chose fire over chains. Mothers whispered to daughters that a fortress still stood, even if no one could see it. Not of stone, but of will. It passed across deserts, overseas, through hidden scripts and forbidden gatherings. Sometimes the name was changed to hide it. Sometimes the details blurred. But the heart of it we chose remained untouched. A soldier in the Balkans, forced to fight in a foreign war, carved a small mountain into the handle of his knife. A prisoner in a Russian cell tapped the story into the wall with his fingernails. 3 short taps. Too long. Masada, Masada. In each generation, someone needed it. Not for glory, but for identity. A reminder that even surrounded, even doomed, a person could still choose how to stand. The world forgot many things, but it did not forget Masada. Then came a new world. Machines, maps, radios. A time of science and war, of discovery and devastation. And still, somewhere, a teacher in a crumbling schoolhouse in Poland recited Eleazar's last words to a classroom of hungry children. And one boy listened. His name was David. He didn't speak, but the mountain climbed into his bones. Years later, that boy would fight in another war won with no fortresses, only fences. But even behind wire, even under the boots of new oppressors, David remembered the flame. He scratched a single word into the wall of his barracks. Still, that word would outlive the camp, outlive the war. And when he emerged, thin but unbroken, he carried the mountain with him. Not in myth, but in memory. Masada had echoed through time, but now, it was ready to rise again. In the early 20th century, the world had changed. Borders shifted, empires collapsed, and amid the rubble, a forgotten people searched for something older than conquest. They were dreamers, scholars, farmers, and survivors Zionists, they called themselves. And though they had no king, no army, they had one thing: memory. Among those memories was a word carved into hearts, not maps. Masada. It began as a whisper in classrooms and libraries. Young Jews, scattered across Europe and the Middle East, learned of the mountain where their ancestors had stood against the might of Rome. The story struck like lightning. It wasn't about death, it was about defiance, about choosing dignity in the face of defeat. In 1920s Palestine, archaeologists found it again not in scrolls but in stone. The walls still stood, the storehouses, the bathhouse, the broken ramp. And in the silence of that desert wind, they heard Eleazar's voice echoing across time. We are free men. Soon, youth groups began climbing it, barefoot, in silence. Before dawn, they lit torches on the summit and read aloud the last speech. Not for tourists, not for ceremony, but for identity. Each climb was a rite of passage, a reclaiming of something sacred. They slept among the ruins. Some cried, some prayed. All of them listened. By the time the State of Israel was born in 1948, Masada was no longer just a ruin. It was a compass, a North Star. Soldiers began to train near the mountain, and soon elite units, paratroopers, commandos were brought to its summit. Under starlight, they swore their oaths beside the ghostly stones. Masada shall not fall again, they said. It became a national ritual. A mountain of memory turned to meaning. School children made the climb every year. Historians debated the facts. Was it suicide? Was it martyrdom? But for the people standing there, it didn't matter. The truth was carved into the land and into them. In the 1960s, full excavations revealed more. Pottery still holding ancient grain, coins marked with rebellion, a scroll room with fragments of scripture. The voices of the dead, unearthed by hands that remembered. Even leaders of state came to the edge of the cliff. They stood where Eleazar once stood and looked down at the Roman camps, still visible in the dust. Some wept. Some stood in silence. All of them understood. Masada had never really fallen. It had only waited.
Masada stood still, but the world around it never did. Generations climbed its path, not for conquest, but for clarity. They came in uniforms and sandals, in silence or song. Some brought flags, others brought questions. All brought something they could not name until they stood at the edge. A boy named Yair came with his school at age 17. It was summer, hot wind. The mountain glowed with heat. He carried a bottle of water, a wrinkled copy of Eleazar's speech, and 1,000 doubts. He'd grown up hearing the story. Every textbook, every holiday, every anthem whispered Masada into his bones. But as he looked out across the desert, he didn't feel pride. He felt, wait, is this who we are? He asked his teacher, is this what we inherited, death before chains? The teacher didn't answer. Instead, he handed Yair a small stone. Decide what it means for you. That's the real climb. Yair sat near the ancient walls and thought. He imagined Miriam watching flames dance. He imagined Roman boots pounding the ramp. He imagined silence after the final breath. And he wondered, was it courage? Was it despair? Was it both? Others had asked the same. Some called Masada a tragedy. Others called it a victory of spirit. Some saw it as a warning. Never again. Others saw it as a question. what would you choose? For soldiers, it meant defiance. For poets, sacrifice. For some, it was too painful to carry. For others, it was the only thing that made sense. Yer pressed the stone into his palm. His heartbeat slowed. He didn't need the answer. Not yet. Just the willingness to keep asking. Later that night, he stood in a circle with his classmates, torches flickering, the sky wide and full of stars. They read Eleazar's final words aloud. But this time, it wasn't ancient. It was now. We are free men, Yer whispered. Masada was not a tomb. It was a test. And it wasn't over. In Tel Aviv, a woman named Lara taught history. Her students asked why they still talked about Masada. Why the odes? Why the myths? She smiled. Because every generation has a Rome. And every person has a Masada. She paused. And somewhere in you, there's an Eleazar.
Masada never truly ended on that cliff. It echoed, in places far from the desert, in times when no one remembered the names but still felt the fire. In Warsaw, when the ghetto rose in defiance against a crushing empire. In South Africa, when voices sang against chains. In jungles, in jails, in silent protests, in final stands. Somewhere someone always remembered Masada without knowing they did. Not every rebellion needs a fortress. Sometimes it's a voice, a march, a truth held in shaking hands. Masada is the moment before surrender when a heart decides, no, not yet. For some, it's survival. For others, sacrifice. But always, it is resistance. An old man in Argentina holding a photo of his daughter taken by a regime. A girl in Iran whispering her name after being told to forget it. A monk lighting a candle in a monastery under siege. They don't speak Hebrew. They don't know Eleazar. But they know what it means to be surrounded and still choose fire over silence. That is Masada. And Masada still rises. It rises in mothers who won't let their sons be forgotten. In journalists who speak when they're told to be quiet. In anyone who's had everything taken except the choice to stand. The mountain no longer needs stone. It lives in spine and spirit. Each generation faces its Rome, and each generation must decide if it will climb, if it will carry the flame forward. In a quiet apartment in New York, a boy hears the story from his grandmother. Her voice trembles, not from age but memory. She speaks of walls, of hunger, of courage she did not know she had. She looks at him. You are not alone. You come from people who chose to burn bright. Even at the end. He doesn't answer. He doesn't need to. Far across the sea, wind still circles the summit of Masada. The stones are warm, the silence deep, but something stirs in that air. Not a scream, not a cry, a whisper. It says, we are still here, not just as a people, but as a choice. Masada is not a ruin. It is a reminder that some flames do not fade. They wait. And when the world grows dark again, they rise. In the hearts of those who remember. In the eyes of those who choose. In the final breath before giving up. That is where Masada lives. And that is where the last flame still burns.
The last flame didn't die with the rebels on Masada. It passed to every voice that refuses silence. Every stand made in the face of darkness. Every soul that chooses freedom over fear. Because Masada was never just a place, it was a choice. And that choice still echoes. Through time, through us, through you. If this story moved you, subscribe to Echoes of Time, hit the bell, and be here for part 3. The flame still burns, and it's far from over.